Hi, my name is Julian Weinert. I'm a research fellow. Hi, I'm a research fellow in the Van Gogh TV project, a research project here at the University of Applied Sciences in Mainz. I have the honor to welcome two guests from the Netherlands. We'll first hear Tjarda De Haan. Is that correct? Okay, thanks. She'll talk about the already mentioned Digital City project, which already started in 1994. And then we'll hear Dr. Josephine Bosma. She'll talk about. Okay, it says here, so not my fault. I'm sorry, she's not a doctor. Okay. Josephine Bosma, she'll talk about experimental reinterpretation approaches to digital art projects, preservation. Thank you so much for being here. And yeah, we'll start with Tjarda De Haan, and afterwards you can, of course, ask questions.
Okay, thanks so much for inviting me. My name is Tjarda De Haan, and I'm just an historian facing a big digital dark age and just wanting to safeguard our digital heritage. That's how the project started. And just to ask around, like, who is older than the internet? Just raise hands. Okay, I thought so. And then, who is younger than the web? That means like the students have left the building, or students? Because we are in an exceptional year of a lot of milestones. As you can see, yesterday we celebrated Internet 50, because 50 years ago, and Sir Tim Berners-Lee is warning us, we have to protect and reform the internet and keep it for the future generations. The web is 30 years. And the digital city is 25 years. Just to ask, who knows the digital city? Who have heard of it before? Then, who had a house in the digital city? Really? Really? Okay, then I start the presentation. Since this is more or less the current situation for a lot of artworks, digital works from the 90s, from the beginning of the web. You can see the right, that's actually an icon from the Digital Preservation Coalition. They made like a bid list, which network arts are distinguishing first. This is actually a picture after we were trying to read data. So then we had to start. Like, we started a project from the Amsterdam Museum. I was a freelancer working on the website and was asked what to do with the digital new age. And I said, help, our digital heritage is getting lost and we have to act. And as you can see, one of my favorite cartoonists, XKCD, diving through a lot of data, old data, finding out actually he wrote poetry when he was a youngster. We know the web isn't made or built to be kept, and the average duration of a website is like 100 days. So we should be warned, the digital dark age is around us. Wrong slide. So in my presentation, I will talk about Digital City. What was it? How did it start? And then how we started this project to make it alive again, and then the challenges we are still facing. So I'll just take it here. So when I was working for the Amsterdam Museum, they are a fantastic museum with a lot of paintings, beautiful objects. They are actually the Historical Museum of Amsterdam. And I was asked in by the head of the collections, Tjarda, what should we do about this digital age coming? And I said, well, there is only one way. You have to dig up one of the biggest icons of Amsterdam to tell the story of Amsterdam, of a different Amsterdam. And you have to dig up the digital city. And my first presentation to the management team, I knew I had to be a little bold, and I presented the absolute piece of art of Antonisson, this is the bird's eye on Amsterdam from 1538. This is a brilliant work, very beautiful, old and oil painting. And this was exception because nobody drawn from top down. So there was no Google Earth, there were no high towers he could stand up. This was an imaginary city he made, but if you look at the details, it's exactly how it was at that time in Amsterdam. So I thought, let's put that big painting next to the screenshot of the digital city and claim it's the same heritage. It's digital heritage, but it's cultural heritage. Not everybody was pleased, but the ones who were told me, okay, you start a project. What was the digital city? It was the first virtual city worldwide. And it was started, Marleen Sticker was the first virtual mayor. And they wanted to take a metaphor to make the internet accessible. We have access for all, the provider, and they wanted to make the content for all. They wanted to make the internet, which was like a gray zone nobody understood, with ugly computers and cables, and how to make it accessible for everybody, not only the militaries or the universities, but for everybody. So they started to make like an interface on this incredible, difficult, complex technology, and then they thought, let's make it a city. And it became the digital city, with squares, with houses where people could live in. A house was then a website. You could have a website. And the numbers of inhabitants, it's not like Facebook, but it was a lot at that time. And the book, the handbook about how to enter the digital city, was like a bestseller in the local bookstore. The modems were sold out when the digital city started. So it attracted a lot of attention because of the metaphor and the use of the city. And especially for the digital city, it was like a playground for artists, technologists. Every time a new technology was founded, they followed it, they tried it, they experimented with it. And as you can see, the first was a bulletin board system, and then the first browser came along, Mosaic. They changed the whole city. So we have different cityscapes following the technology and following the wishes of the inhabitants, because the inhabitants, some of them were developers. They thought about projects and how to enter this new wild world. So it was like a cultural forum. People had ideas, traditions, and for that, for historians, it's a very interesting city to find and dig up. It's like actually a historical source. And for technology reasons, it's very interesting to see what they did try and how did they do it. And here you see a few examples of the innovative work they did. They tried to make hybrids, constellations. There was smart TV, and that's not like a Samsung, you know, now, but it was really smart. It was really smart. It was like an offline meeting where people came together with ideas, and actually we found them in the project. And these are 6 hours video tapes about the opening of the digital city. One episode is only about sound and sound clouds, but they were experimenting how can you combine the internet and the television. The web walks, that was somebody was telling how you could browse through websites, and there was actually the first archaeological service telling about artifacts found in the digital city. So for the museum, mainly paintings and objects, we had to do a lot of arguing why they wanted a digital city in their museum. Because I worked at the digital city from 96 till 2000, and I knew a lot of people were still around of the digital city. We wanted to write history, we wanted to find all the cities back, but there were a lot of egos, a lot of people with big ideas, and it was really hard to get them together. But the moment the museum was interested, it was like a safe haven. It was okay. And for the museum, it's an object. And with an object, you can tell the story of Amsterdam, that Amsterdam was a front runner in the digital age. We have a good nod, the exchange of Amsterdam, and we have a very interesting history of squatting. And first the squatting of the houses with independent media activists. We have a lot of local radio, a lot of television broadcasting, combining with internet. So there was squatting of houses, squatting of websites, hacking, and now in Amsterdam we're doing a lot of squatting of biohacking. We're good in that. So that means that we had like a playground to start the digital city, and it was a good story to tell for the Amsterdam Museum. So we started the project with a lot of problems, because there was not a method. The digital city, I must tell, was a city, it was a website. And this website was taken offline in 2001. So there was no more website and there was no more digital city. So when we started the project in 2011, we first talked. There was no website, there was no code, there was actually nothing, but just a bundle of people we could combine in a pub. So there was no material. The methods, there was nothing to do, there was no web archiving to do. We first had to find the artifacts. And then we found out there are no web archaeological tools. There is no central repository for tools. There is no software library and no e-depot, so we just started. And the goals were to reconstruct and preserve the digital city. And we especially wanted to ask attention for the danger of digital amnesia. And we wanted to find the data, but also make it usable for future research. So we started the project with a start, and you excavate, you reconstruct, you archive and give access, and you share. Mainly that was the project, that was the framework. And then we started with the grave diggers party. The best way to do this kind of projects is get the people who still are alive a lot, bring them together, put beer in front of them, or coffee, that's good too, and make them talk about stories and ask them to look at their attics and wherever, if they have any floppies, any servers, or just photos or screenshots, or maybe code, and invite them to a party. We organized it in the Waag with Marleen Sticker, and we made a huge party with red and white tape. Mostly it's used by the police, but we made it like an attention place where only real technologists could enter. So I was not allowed. I was more part of the exhibition part. Everything we found, we had like found cards to write the metadata, who brought it in, what was it, what should it do, what is the function, when was it made, who can we contact if we need more information. So the grave diggers party was actually to collect hardware and memories, stories. And when you start a project like that, you need to know what you're looking for. So we talked with a lot of DDS administrators or writers. We knew we're looking for software, hardware, special project, and houses. And what we found was a lot of material. These are more the physical parts, and what you can see here is that the internet was really new. As well, there was not a design. So a new generation of designers made like big letters, loud colors. This was the way in the Netherlands. And there were a lot of booklets, postcards here, like greetings from the digital city, a paper one, booklets with stories, explanations, and a big newspaper with announcements. And we did a lot of research. The Wayback Machine, of course, is sacred. There is a lot of website, a lot of snapshots of the digital city. But point is, Bruce de Kale started in 96, sorry. No, 96. Yeah, precies. And the digital city started in 94. So 2 years of gray zone, dark matter. But by entering the digital city in the search engine, we found a lot of information. And here I read about a freeze. And this is a special story. When the digital city existed 2 years in 96, they gave themselves as a birthday party their own archive. They knew they were onto something new. So they decided to make a freeze. And the freeze was made on 15 January 96. And it was supposed to be a freeze of everything of the digital city to safeguard for future archaeologists and historians like us. But then a big discussion started because not everybody in the digital city was liking this because of privacy reasons. So there was really like uprising and quarrels, and then the digital city decided to listen, of course, to the people, and they said, okay, we're only gonna archive the non-private part. So if you had to log in for a service, you would not be allowed, they would not download it. And then we found out that was not the case, but officially they wanted to do that. We have Delver in the Netherlands, that is all newspapers digitalized, so we could find a lot of good articles about the digital city. And so we were looking for the freeze, because we knew, hey, that's interesting. They were archiving themselves, and then we found the freeze. Those are the three DLT tapes, and we were given them by Joost, the self-made manager of the digital city, and we were so happy. We were happy for a week, screaming, yes, we have the freeze. Yes, finally, we have the archive. And then we thought, oh God, we don't have a reader to read the tapes. And then a whole search started, asking everybody around me who has a reader to read the tapes. And then it started at the Royal Library in Den Haag. And René told me, come here, we found one. And it was used as a stool, a footstool. But it still blinks, some noise is getting out, and I come and collect it in Den Haag. So I went in Den Haag, and in the time we had the freeze tapes only. We did not have any tapes. I was looking for tapes because, you know, this is digital heritage. But can't I have a tape where I can experiment with first? No. And then I sat with my other fellow web archaeologist, and we were just like 5 minutes really doubting, shall we do it? Of course, so you put the tape into the tape reader, and then, stuck. It was terrible. But then he was a really clever guy. He like reverse engineered the whole tape reader, all parts, and I could get a tape out. I was rewinding the tape. And in the end, we found this man, and Henk Peek, the man is intelligent. He works at CERN. That says enough. The man is very clever, and with, I don't know what kind of instruments, it was not a tape reader, it looked like it, but as well he had something from wood and a rubber elastic, and he got 11 gigabyte of data from the tapes. So we went from error to the avatars, which was the first algorithm in the digital city to make the users to identify themselves with a unique picture, because there were no digital cameras to make a photo with your account. So then we had the data, and then the museum did not have any technical people to help us. So we were working together with the university, and 3 years of students who were really asking themselves, why should I engage in this digital city stuff? Because it's old and it's ugly code. It's really, really badly written. And when we told them, you know, this is top notch. This is cutting edge code, but like 20 years ago. And finally, I could persuade the students, like, it's like you are being in a forensic research, you're a detective, and you have to go back into the history and try to find a way how to reconstruct the data. And after 3 years, we had 2 versions of the code. So they made 2 reconstructions because I wanted a minimum and a maximum variant as possible. My dream was like, I want a 4D collection. And moving forward, can anybody see the difference between the emulation and the replica? No, of course not. They're almost the same. The one made with completely new code and the other with old, and they're actually even fast. I have 5 minutes, so I will go to the end. So we got a reconstruction, and then we are in the phase of then how to archive this to safeguard for next generation and sustainable. So you do the bit preservation. We have a master as a virtual machine, and the Institute for Sound Division in the Netherlands is the depot. They are going to web archive it. And the museum part is like showing the digital city to the people. Because as the freeze not supposed to get private data from that time, the digital city people downloaded everything because there was not a possible way to make a distinction seeing the code of that time. So if you want to show something of the digital city, you make people first sign a contract because there's so much data, email boxes, well, chats are officially public, but you don't, people thought at that time, I chat and then it's gone. But the emails, people are still alive now and they do not want their email around. So it is for scientific research, you can sign a contract and then find the digital city. And the big challenge we have now, because the freeze, it's only one snapshot. And we have much more data collected at the Gravediggers party. But then you have to find a lot of students, of a lot of incredible, clever people, and then you have to reconstruct because we have the sites, but we did not find the video and audio. So there is a server, I was told with a little audio, we found some parts, and then even you have to reconstruct it together. So we are celebrating, we are very glad that we could get so far, but there is still a lot of work to do. And so you plan, excavate, reconstruct, archive, and then you share it. We wrote a do-it-yourself handbook, Web Archaeology, that if you want to try the project, it is in Dutch, but Google translates really, really good. So that was it.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much. Are there any questions? Here, come.
Is there also a retirement spa hospital for media artists in the digital city?
Absolutely. And if there's not, we create it for you.
Okay. With massage, please.
Only digital.
You were saying that you were involved in the digital city when it was live. Do you think a project of that scope could be done by somebody from, a complete outsider who was not familiar with the website and the system and the people behind it at all?
Yes. I mean, it helps. But the part of like the Gravediggers party was so important because you have to get the community back together. And you should interview, I think, you showed a lot of interviews. I think that's the most important. It's like you're doing oral history projects. You have to get the stories, the memories, and finally you can get the puzzle together. You don't have to work at the digital city, you understand? It helps a lot. You know people. But you can start, and you have to create like a community. It is possible. It helps.
I was just wondering if you were aware that when the freeze happened, that was 2 days before Next 5 Minutes too. So I'm wondering whether they presented it there, if that was maybe part of why they froze it. But then I also have a question. Was it all web-based? Because you're talking about web archaeology all the time.
The first black interface you saw was the bulletin board system. And then as soon as it was possible, it became HTML. And it was not only HTML, a lot of audio, video. There was a metro, a subway built with a MUD or a MO, multi-use dungeon. The reason so much happened, it was a playground. Everybody could join, almost everybody, you had to be persistent. But the use of technology and playing with that was the whole reason. So there are many applications where we found code but have not put together yet.
Can I answer to Tilman a little? Because you were wondering about the organization and so on. This happened in a very lively media underground scene. That's how it grew so fast and so big.
Yeah, and the reconstruction took almost as long as the city was alive. That's a little painful, but it was 7 years online, and it took us 7 years to make the 2 reconstructions, and still the Institute of Sound and Vision is now putting it in their e-depot. But getting there, getting there.
But did you enjoy that, or was it like this tedious thing that just wouldn't end and, back?
It's like, when you can have a really bad headache, like nightmares, and then ecstatic, all that. When we found the 3 tapes, it was ecstatic. We were so incredible, happy and proud, and then just a few hours later, like, oh, we don't have the reader. The disappointments, and then still you're almost there, and then what do we have in the end? We have 1 snapshot. It took us 3 years with students. We had really to persuade the students to do it. They were really complaining about the ugliness of the code, and then we have to explain the computer science students that history is really interesting and really helps you to become a better developer. No, I really liked it.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, so we'll move on straight away.
Maybe I can do it myself. Right, there we go. And then from the beginning, right? Yeah. Okay, well, first of all, let me start by saying that I'm really envious of you, Tjarda, as I am also envious of Tilman, as I told him before, because you have, and as I was of the Electronic Cafe guy in New York when he was giving his presentation, because you are all investigating, researching these projects that have happened quite at least 10 years after the one that I'm researching, and there's so much more documentation. So I'm going to have to disappoint you. I cannot present this wonderful detective story that you just saw. And I'm going to have to disappoint you in another way as well, in a way that I have been disappointed myself when I went to see many different art conservation symposia on digital art, where a lot of the talk was just about preserving the integrity of the piece. So I will be doing a lot of that, and that's very boring. When you're just into these technical details and all this excavation of old machines, etc., etc. So, and then what I also wanted to say, this was because someone, someone made a comment, I don't know who it was anymore, about the Internet of Things starting 10 years ago. I don't think that we should be talking about the Internet of Things. What you probably mostly refer to as a sort of Web 2.0, sort of the mobile internet. Yes, we're not living with the Internet of Things yet, I would say. Not really. It's coming fast, but it's not what you think of with the Internet of Things, right? The internet that you talk about is the 90s internet. And I'm going to talk about an internet before that, or a computer network culture before that is sort of similar to the internet culture that we have today. So it's more, there's more overlap between online and offline. Well, anyway, bear with me, okay?
I might get the point, but
it's okay.
We have time for questions.
We have time for questions later, yes. So, in the late 70s, early 80s, artists started to use telecommunication technologies for a new kind of art. I'm very sorry there's not many students here because I've really aimed my talk at them. One in which artist and audience are closely connected. These were the days before the internet was public, but some artists had the opportunity to create online networks through other means. Among them was the late Robert Adrian, a Canadian artist living and working in Vienna. Adrian was one of the initiators of Artbox, later renamed as Artex, the first online artist network. He started that in 1980. In the Media Art database, Inke Arns writes, the Artex network amounted to a veritable revolution, and international communications events organized in the course of the 1980s by Artex community members seemed to foreshadow developments in the next decade. One of these events was Robert Adrian's own The World in 24 Hours, an entire day and night-long telecommunications art performance in which 14 nodes across the world were connected to the central site in Linz, Austria. Not counting the first online symposium, The Artist's Use of Telecommunication in 1979, it was the first elaborate network performance, making it one of the most obvious candidates to represent this almost forgotten era in art history. For the past few years, I have investigated how to best create a contemporary representation of this work, made 40 years ago, a work involving near obsolete media technologies and which we know solely through very little documentation. Also because an important element in the work was a computer network that no longer exists, I looked into an experimental conservation method called reinterpretation. It is a method that involves a deep engagement on the part of the interpreter and requires answering many tough questions in order to preserve the integrity of the work. There's that awful word. Some background and nostalgia maybe. I met Adrian in March 1993 at The Art of Being Everywhere, an event curated by him at V2 in Den Bosch, the Netherlands. The Art of Being Everywhere was about, there it is, as Adrian talking. The Art of Being Everywhere was about electronic networks in art and involved, amongst others, David Blair with his first film, the very first film made for the web, called Rex, or the Discovery of Television Amongst the Bees. There was also Ponton Media Lab and Carl Dudacek with talking about Van Gogh TV. And there was also the Belgian artist Dirk Paasmans, now known as one half of the famous net art duo Jody, talking about his SEP TV. Robert Adrian came with Gerrit Stocker to present their mutual project Zero.net. Alex Adriaansen, director of V2, introduced Adrian as the artist who created the first online artist network in 1980. And it was as if a new world opened for me. What I assumed to be new right then and there was not new at all. A deep history of art in electronic networks existed. So for many years I talked about this deep history in lectures. It never occurred to me it might be possible to present this work in any other way until a seed was planted in my brain by Unfold. Again, this here. A research project by Lima in Amsterdam launched in 2016, in which the possibility to preserve artworks through the reinterpretation was investigated. Unfold was inspired by the variable media approach, by the Variable Media's Initiative 2003 publication, Permanence Through Change, the Variable Media Approach, in which preservation or restaging approaches from theatre and dance are suggested to use for the preservation of digital art and or other unstable art forms. It might be interesting to really compare the appearance of this book. So this was 2003. Unfold started in 2016. So in the 13 years between those two, not much happened in digital art conservation. It was like a digital standstill. I think actually, your presentation was amazing, what Horizon has accomplished. But for a long time, emulation was like the only possible strategy or real strategy, and preserving old machines was like, these were the two possible strategies for preserving digital art, and they don't always apply. You can't always use them. So this was a sort of desperate measure maybe to look into something else completely, and this was reinterpretation. Unfold project leader Gabi Weijers quotes from the Variable Media Initiative's book, saying, within its framework, reinterpretation is defined by the Variable Media Initiative as the most radical preservation strategy, as it implies reinterpreting the work each time it is recreated. For the Variable Media Initiative, reinterpretation is a dangerous technique when not warranted by the artist, but it may be the only way to recreate performed, installed, or network art designed to vary with context. Unquote. Reinterpretation, therefore, is a conservation technique that should be applied with caution. I started considering to reinterpret the world in 24 hours for the first time after a question came from Michael Connor. He asked which net art piece that had disappeared I would like to see again. We discussed the restaging of the work for the net art anthology, but it seemed too complex to fit within the initial the net art anthology's conservation approach. By coincidence, 3 months later, an artist came to visit me who boldly announced he was going to restage the world in 24 hours. It was such a surprise. He had been given documentation from this era by Bill Bartlett, an old friend and colleague of Robert Adrian. We decided to collaborate. It turned out he had not thought of contacting either Adrian's widow, Heidi Grundmann, or Ars Electronica, both important parties in the original work. Especially Ars Electronica was important as the most logical partner to recreate the work's main network node. This is the hallway where it all happened. This is the place, amazing structure. If you look at the old pictures of the world in 24 hours, you don't see what an amazing site that really was. So my first step in the collaboration, therefore, was to arrange a meeting with Grundmann and Ars Electronica director Gerwig Stocker. Grundmann and Stocker feared a purely techno-fetishist event if we recreated the work. Stocker made it very clear he was only interested in a reinterpretation of the world in 24 hours if we did extensive research into the motivation of the different artists involved first. Stocker suspected there might be political motives and institutional critique behind their participation. Stocker's remarks overlapped with my own questions about whether we had to try to recreate the work with the original participants, or that we could do something else entirely. It made me wonder what we absolutely had to include in a reinterpretation. Interviewing the original artist after 40 years, though, turned to be quite a challenge, the size of which I did not immediately recognize. So I acted as a bit of a detective, trying to retrace all these participants, and this was very difficult, took a lot of time. I performed a number of interviews via email with the original collaborators and participants of the work I was able to track down. The artists I did find often had conflicting or lacking memories of the event, just like Tilman mentioned yesterday, also happened with Van Gogh TV actually. I focused on the participants' reasons to collaborate with Adrian in his work and on what they did in that time slot. I'm now going to show you a few slides with works that were done there and the responses of some artists. So I have 3 slides like this. So this is Thomas Bahle, who was in Frankfurt. What emerged from the responses is that the world in 24 hours was not so much a collaborative work, but a kind of art platform, following Olga Goronyova's definition of organizational aesthetics in her work on art platforms. Adrian's role was different from that of most participants, who simply used the event as a stage or platform for their own work. This also reminds of what Van Gogh TV, Karl Dudecek and Mike Hens were talking about last night. So the different approaches and roles among the participants enabled a first draft of a possible reinterpretation. I concluded that Adrian's role within the work was essential, whereas that of many of the participants was of secondary importance. We therefore had to look at what Adrian's intent with the work was more closely. This is a group from Italy in Florence. So my next step was to read texts by Robert Adrian and some of his collaborators written after the event. Interviews done with Adrian over the years and texts he wrote give additional insight into the way the artist's thoughts developed. Adrian's website contains a lot of documentation, less than you have, obviously. And there are 3 texts that give some insight into how the work was developed and what his motivation to make it was. The first document is the invitation sent to the participants. I only give you small screenshots of these things as an illustration. Here Adrian writes, the project is a series of non-stop dialogues. In the second document, the catalog text for Ars Electronica 1982, Adrian describes the world in 24 hours as a telecommunications program by artists intended to develop techniques for individual, personal use of existing telecommunications technology. In Adrian's view, media technologies and systems are not designed for the public, but for corporate users, leaving individual users out of the development process entirely. He ends by saying that artists using electronic telecommunications are trying to find human meaning in an electronic space. Adrian seems critical of corporate media developments and interested in exploring a potential alternative use of corporate media products. Initially, the results of the world in 24 hours leave him hopeful. In his final report, the 3rd document, Adrian writes, shortly after finishing the project, looking through the material we received, one can find a new kind of art developing, a new medium. It is a very exciting feeling. In the 1984 publication Telecommunication Art, Adrian is more down to earth and sober again. He describes the world in 24 hours simply as a project conceived as an experiment in the use of easily accessible telecommunications media for the exchange of works by artists using the international telephone system. Let's not forget that the early internet and all the early networks were based on the telephone network. Yet between this text and an essay written a few years later, something clearly changed. In his text Elektronischer Raum for a Kunstforum in a 1989 special on network systems, Adrian is downright pessimistic and bleak. The world in 24 hours would not have been so this is a quote from him there. The world in 24 hours would have been a useful exercise if its basic assumptions about the future would have been confirmed, he writes. Yet the future had already been decided in the offices and labs of electronic corporations and their military, industrial, and commercial clients long before 1982. In these decisions, cheap interactive networks of artists and other users, independent from institutions, simply did not exist. With the electronic pollution caused by decisions like these, we will have to live for a long time. Though the bitterness we can read in the 1989 Kunstforum text was only temporary, Adrian took part in a mid-90s net art discussions, taking a much more neutral position. It is necessary to mention it. From personal talks with Adrian's widow Heidi Grundmann, I learned that, like his friend Bill Bartlett, who had gone bankrupt from creating the first online art conference for Karl Löffler in 1979, Robert Adrian also went bankrupt from working with the IPSA network in the end. He had maintained the network for Artex member Roy Ascott in the latter's planetary network at the Venice Biennale in 1986. While Bartlett's bankruptcy had made him stop working as an artist completely, Bartlett started working for the Canadian Postal Service in 1983. Adrian had been able to survive as an artist only thanks to his wife's support, but the situation left him deeply frustrated and bitter. Though the membership of the IPSA network was free, sending and receiving messages on it was charged by the character, with many artists including old messages in responses, which was also very impolite to do still in the 90s. If you reply to an email, use the email of the person who sent, who approached you in the same email that you returned. So you can imagine that would start costing a lot of money. Both Löffler and Ascott had left their partners with the bill. And this is why I show this, because in the MediaArtNet database, there's a quote from Kathleen Schloter, who writes that the 14 exhibition days and following 2-month-long online conference of Planetary Network of 1986 was financed by IP Sharp, so the IPSA network, the corporate network that the artist used. And this is simply not true. So it's really an interesting, I wonder where this story comes from. I still need to dig into this more. So even if the IPSA network was very important in the World in 24 Hours and other large telecommunication art events, the system also had a downside. The artists seem to not have fully been aware of when they started to work with it. To understand more about the costs of using Artext, I exchanged emails with Roger Moore, former IP Sharp CEO, with Robert Benecki, Chief APL Programmer of IPSA, and with Leslie Goldsmith, the programmer behind the IPSA mailbox. Since nobody could tell me exactly what the difference was between the original mailbox and Artbox Artex, I had to make do with speculation. The programmer of the original mailbox, Leslie Goldsmith, suggests, so let me just show you a picture from, this is the computer, that the mainframe of the IPSA, the IP Sharp office, and this is Robert Adrian trying it for the very first time in 1979 in Vienna at a local node of this global corporations network. Where am I? So Leslie Goldsmith suggests the mailbox was widely used and had a huge user and message database. A smaller instance of the exact same code would have performed better simply because the directory sizes would have been smaller. This is the main advantage I can think of. Think an implementation such as Artex would possess. And to give an idea of the costs involved, Robert Benecke writes, I remember that if the system was down for 1 minute, we lost 10,000 Canadian dollars in revenue. That was likely spread across 700 to 1,000 users, so 10 Canadian dollars a minute would not be out of line for a heavy-duty user with deep pockets, e.g. a merchant bank or a pharmaceutical firm. 10 Canadian dollars in 1980 would almost amount to $30 in 2019. So that would be 20 euros per minute. That is cost. So Artex and the IPSA network it ran on were costly. But without this connection to IP-sharp, the artists would not have had the opportunity to share messages around the globe real time in a many-to-many network. Though so far for reinterpretation, we have to take it into account. The question is what the IPSA network space and function really was in the work. And so we look at that connection. The connection to IP-sharp turns out to have developed from a coincidental meeting between Robert Benecke and the Canadian artist Norman White, who in turn got Bill Bartlett, friend of Robert Adrian, involved to work with IPSA, and he in turn, as we learned from Tilman Baumgartel's interview with Robert Adrian, sent a postcard to his friend Robert Adrian in Vienna to send him to the Vienna IP-sharp office. Artex and the world in 24 hours therefore depended on both a social and technological network. This, I think, is an important core aspect of the work for reinterpretation. So ultimately, we could even conclude that a friendship between a programmer working for a global corporation, this guy here, and an artist, Norman White, produced the first wave of art in computer networks. So the first wave of art in computer networks was triggered by a purely coincidental friendship between these two guys. Norman Wright writes in an email, Benecke is one of my best friends and technical supporters. My telecommunication experience in the late 70s and early 80s would not have happened without him. The connection to IP-sharp thus was in essence non-commercial, even if using the mailbox was costly at times. The IPSA network was a coincidental tool, but essential. It was a tool of opportunity that was combined with several others, SoScan TV, telefax, telephone, telex, etc., within the world in 24 hours. This leaves us with the question whether just any computer network at hand might replace it for reinterpretation. And looking at another aspect, in order to answer the last question, it might be useful to look at how the other technologies in the world in 24 hours were applied. Talking to Heidi Grundmann produced an interesting new detail. A major issue in the organization of the world in 24 hours was Austrian telecom. Telecom companies in general strongly resisted the development of new network technologies, which they quickly recognized as competitors. They used a stronghold on the basic infrastructure in early networking, the telephone lines, and stringent national media laws to control these developments. IP-sharp CEO Moore and Robert Benecke, for example, mentioned how telecom businesses asked IP-sharp ridiculously high fees for the use of their networks, which was an important reason for the high mailbox fees in turn. Heidi Grundmann, on the other side, told me the robot 400 machine that you see here, it was used for slow scan TV application within these events, these early telecommunication art events. I'll show you a clip of that later on. So this machine was legal to use in Austria and had to be smuggled into the country in a diplomat's suitcase. So access to media technology in 1982 was much more difficult in general. Let me show you, do I have time to show a little bit of this video? Okay. Let's see if I can, I don't see the, Earlier on we had a, maybe it's already playing, but it's, I can't see the, I'm sorry, I think I have to. The problem is this clip starts with a few minutes of blackness. So I have to, there we are, there we are, there we are. What I like about this is you see the connection to the telephone really well because they open up a piece of the telephone to attach the robots to it for the slow scan TV, I think. So this is 1 year after the world in 24 hours.
Vienna and Vancouver were connected by 2 telephone lines, one to carry sound and the other to carry video.
This is Robert
Video moves along the telephone line by means of slow scan. The slow scan robot grabs a frame of video every 8 seconds and digitally encodes that still image into sound. A similar machine
Bill Bartlett behind the desk.
Decodes that sound back.
The other guy is Hank Bull.
It takes 8.5
seconds
for each image to form itself over the previous one, hence slow scan.
The slow scan picture is coming through. Okay. Helmet? Yeah. Okay, let's start.
I think we can move
Tjarda De
on.
Haan. Okay.
So I'm going to cut it off because otherwise it takes long. So access to media technology in 1982 was much more difficult in general. Helmut Mark, organizer of the Vienna node of the World in 24 Hours, gives some more background. In an email, he explains how not only it was very costly to have telephone lines installed for the project, but also that in those days, Austrian Telecom had a so-called Vierteltelephon system, meaning a phone line would be shared by 4 users. If another user used the line, you could not make a call. Mark recalls how also computers, fax machines, so this is a fax machine, and then they are much smaller now, and copy machines were no consumer projects back then, but expensive tools, mostly used by huge companies. Based on this technological background, it would seem wrong to simply recreate the world in 24 hours using the easily accessible tools of today without questioning. At this point, my collaboration with the artist collapsed and we went our different ways because I think that he initially just thought, to recreate the project easily now and just to have some fun for 24 hours, and that was it. Presenting an almost, I'm going to get into my conclusion now, presenting almost forgotten but important early art in electronic networks from documentation alone is not ideal. Reinterpretation is an interesting but potentially dangerous preservation method for works in this context. It might bring deeper, easily missed aspects of these works literally alive for a new audience, but it could also alter the work significantly if done incorrectly. This is what the widow of Adrian was very much afraid of. She said, but all we were interested in is connecting and communicating, and you can do that so easily now. So you have to look at different aspects of the work to see where its critical edge was. At first sight, it seems fitting for a performance-based work like the world in 24 hours to use reinterpretation as an approach. But this work was so large and made in such different circumstances from today that in order to preserve the integrity of the work, that's a terrible word again, reinterpretation is quite complex and difficult. It asks for a lot of sensitivity for the artist's intent and for a careful assessment and transposing of the media context at the time. So, can we find an overlap? In my opinion, this could only be done through a close collaboration between a curator or conservator and a critical artist or artist network working in a similar manner to that of Adrian. And here I have an example of someone I would like to see do this. This is Julian Oliver and Danya Vasiliev with their network shop, teaching people how to build networks. The results might look quite different from the world in 24 hours if we would reinterpret this way. So context would still need to be provided. In an article from 1983 for Leonardo, the World in 24 Hours participant Eric Gidney, someone I wasn't able to track down unfortunately, writes how both Bartlett and Adrian developed forms in which the artist acts as a catalyst or initiator, providing equipment and know-how, but not determining the actual structure of the activity. All texts show Robert Adrian as an idealist who wants to create alternative electronic media networks for art. Today, we might call him a tactical media artist, or maybe a critical engineer, like that's what these guys call themselves, depending on the context and circumstances. At least, his work fits into these categories. Since these approaches are still alive and well, a reinterpretation of the world in 24 hours is not entirely unthinkable. And that was my last words. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Are there any questions?
Thanks. Yeah, I've been, of course, in conversation with you about this project and following it for quite a long time. And I wanted to ask you, I think I do sort of wonder whether there could be value in a reinterpretation that has no integrity, if it is approached in the correct way. And I'm thinking about this partly because I would say that—
No integrity, but in a correct way.
Well, what I mean is that when we remade Julie's project, it wasn't like the original in any meaningful sense. But the process that we went through with that project was, on a somewhat smaller scale, had a lot of the aspects of the process that you went through. Like we had to go to her farm, we planted garlic and harvested it. So going through all of these steps revealed so much about what decisions she would have encountered and what the thinking was, but then it just came out completely different. It didn't really resemble the original, and I think was understood by everyone as essentially a new thing. And I think restaging World in 24 Hours, the way that you were talking about it, yeah, it's you, of course, through going through this process of conversation, you reveal so much. But then the experience would have been nothing, it would have been nothing like the original. So I just wonder if there's some other dimension that's important. And I have an example that might be where these reenactments reinterpretations can fall down, which is, I spoke with Kit Galloway about the reinterpretation that happened recently of Hole in Space in San Francisco. And he was really upset about it, actually. And he said—
There was a reinterpretation of that?
Yes. But the reason he was upset wasn't that they reinterpreted it. It was that he felt that they missed all of these things about the original. So, the original Hole in Space was a video link between New York and West Coast.
Satellite link, right?
Satellite, yeah. And it was life-size, and it wasn't contextualized. No one was told what it was. So people came upon it in this really excellent way. And he felt that what upset him wasn't that it was done improperly, but that when it was redone, they said it showed that Hole in Space couldn't happen again. And he was like, that's bullshit. It could happen again. You just need to pick,
Yeah.
So.
But he wasn't involved then.
He wasn't. But it made me think that it's more about the conclusion that was drawn that upset him, more than the difference from the original. So yeah, I think there's a lot of room for creativity and accident in the reinterpretation, as long as the analysis is clear, that there's distinctions that emerge.
I completely lost your question in that.
Well, I'm pushing back on like whether you urge so much caution about reinterpretation, and I wonder if there's lots of room in reinterpretation, but just that we need to be careful about our analysis of reinterpretation.
Yes, exactly. That's what. Well, that was probably unclear, but that's what I meant. You know, that it is difficult because you have to go through all these steps and looking at every aspect and looking at it from a more analytical point of view rather than a material point of view. And that is where it becomes tricky. You know, you have to get into the head of someone, you have to look at the political space at the time, you have to look at the technological, cultural space at the time, and somehow see if there's a way that you can recreate that today. I think that is the tricky part, right? And that's also where they fell flat with the Kit Calloway Hole in Space thing. It sounds like that anyway. I'm sure you could recreate Hole in Space in a way that would surprise the people involved in a similar way.
Or maybe it's okay to recreate it badly, but just say that it was, foreground your gaps.
Yeah.
Okay, Wes,
I
another
would-
question?
No, it's not really a question. I would say it's an addition. I think every reconstruction is also always an interpretation. The whole process where you try to reconstruct something, the same process you described has happened and always. So I think there is also not a real authentic reconstruction. So if a thing is lost and you try to reconstruct it, then always it is an interpretation.
Yeah, you're right.
Thank
you very much for saying that, because of course this is true, and you hear it with every time they build up an old media art installation anew. You get these same questions, but with this one, of course, there's because a lot of it is a lot of the reinterpretation has to be done in completely new set of circumstances.
Yeah, I
You know,
understand. I think it's a
culturally,
gradual.
materially, it's a bigger challenge, I would say.
Sure, right. But in the end, maybe we could say this is like a graduation. You have an extreme, this total reinterpretation and reenactment or something like it was described there, or maybe what I did with this clubnet, and then we have a more closer reconstruction, which is more authentic also. Also, short annotation is for the gap in 2007 to 2010, there was this Media Art Institute in Linz, done by Dieter Daniels, and in this context, we, for an example, bring to life again Jodie's website in different stages, like in 5 different stages. So I think it was around 2009. Where we worked with them together, and also with the Think Vienna we reconstructed, but it never went online because the institute was closed, because they lost the funding. So there was a lot of work in between 2003 and 2014. There was not really a gap, I would think.
I'm sorry, what?
You said, you said there were a gap between 2003 and 2014 in these archaeological things, that there was nothing happen. I hear it in the lecture.
Oh, like that?
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just talking about my experience from these symposiums where I seem to hear the same stories over and over and over again. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the floor where people are tinkering with putting works back together.
Thank you so much. I think every reconstruction is an interpretation. And as a historian, maybe I'm very naive about this, but no documents, no history. I think it's a new interpretation of history and doing history and trying to get the almost digital dark age back into ground. I think it's an extra value. It's like a reverse engineering as well. You can only understand the past if you can reconstruct or reinterpret it. So I think it's an added value for you to reconstruct the whole process and the artist context. That
I
was
have
not-
to say that every time I present it, I feel lacking because there's always aspects that you forget to mention, like for instance that computers in those days didn't have screens, and so that also to me feels like something that is interesting to look at again now, and there was no web, you know, so that also makes it somehow easier to maybe imagine a reinterpretation today, you know, from this point of view, to see if we can create a network completely separate from these corporate structures in any way. Anyway.
Okay, I'd say we'll have a final question by Karl.
To the transition of that project, I mean, Bob came from fax art before, then went to net. Fax art had still the physical, there have been faxes on the walls, and I mean, I've been in Vienna, we had contact with Bob and we worked for the 24
You were also part of the world in 24 hours.
Because we went from Europe to Asia for 6 years and sent it in information. I think that the terms reconstruction, what you guys repeat, there needs to be a post-rationalization of these projects, because what is missing is that how, especially in this project, there was a deep frustration, a deep disappointment of the diversity of interests in it. And I think to hide it, because to make glossy covers, I think this is a very integrative and integer and important part, the deep frustration and disappointment and what Bob actually had. I met him, we lived not far away, and we met in coffees longer. And also the psyche between Roy Ascott, Bob Galloway, and Forest 1 and Forest 2. Forest 2 is almost forgotten, even that Forest 2 was the net artist. Yeah? And this is a very important part to be highlighted in all the media project. I mean, which we also anticipated. Yeah, I mean
So you mean the frustration and tension within the artist circle, or do you mean like, because you were talking about sort of recognition also from outside the project, or what?
Within
exactly?
the artist circle. I mean, within the participants, because I mean, Bob was.
I also already mentioned, this thing
Bob was
with
an intelligent guy, and he knew what was happening by using these picture phones, telephone lines, and so on. How naive and simple the structuring was, because there was no matrix or no editorial structuring of the conversation, or at least it came very late in. It kicked very late in to structure this again in a traditional way. Yeah. So the freedom of communication was there, because the communication lines, the fax lines, and everything was. And then later on, you know what I mean.
You mean the events themselves got more structured, and
later on,
and the hierarchies within the artist groups became stronger? Is that what you said?
Of course.
Yeah, I think that we are just starting to excavate these old projects and this history. You know, because I've learned about so many artists working in this same tradition and this same context at the time in the late 70s and early 80s that I never heard of before.
Because around Heidi and around Bob, there's a huge archive, just sleeping. which can be.
Well, that is actually a problem because
Yeah.
after Bob died, the archive went to the city of Vienna, and it's now hidden in the city archive. And I called them, and it's almost impossible to get in.
In best ways, it's hidden. But also Heidi has one of the biggest audio radio net radio archives in the world, I would say, and there's nothing. So that everything is a very cloudy, dark history.
Oh, by the way, an anecdote for this. I found somewhere Robert Adrian writing that he was very frustrated that he got the wrong tape recorder from the ORF to use in The World in 24 Hours, so none of the audio of that is saved.
So, thank you very, very much. We'll now have a lunch break. After that, we'll have our panel featuring Professor Jennet, and he'll introduce us to the Peacemaker and the motion back software. Okay, thank you.